The day began like many others for her, with no clear plan except finding a way to get through it. The city was already awake. Cars moved slowly, people walked fast, and the sound of voices mixed with traffic and street noise. She stood near the edge of a large public space where people often gathered to eat, talk, and enjoy music. There was a piano there, polished and bright, placed more as decoration than something meant for everyone to use. Most days, trained performers played it. Today, no one was playing. She watched from a distance for a long time. Hunger sat heavy in her stomach, not sharp but dull, like a constant reminder she could not escape. She had learned to ignore it as much as possible, but it never fully went away. Her clothes were clean but worn. They told a quiet story of many washes and careful use. Nothing about her stood out, and that was something she had grown used to. People passed her without looking. Some were busy, some were laughing, and some were lost in their phones. A few noticed her and quickly looked away. She understood that look. It was the look of someone who did not want to feel uncomfortable. She did not blame them. Life had taught her not to expect much from strangers. Her eyes returned again and again to the piano. It was not just an object to her. It was a memory. It reminded her of another time, a quieter place, and hands that once guided hers across keys. Those memories felt far away now, almost like they belonged to someone else. Still, they lived inside her, waiting. She knew asking would be risky. People did not like being approached, especially by someone who looked like she did. They often assumed things. She took a deep breath and waited for the right moment. A small group had gathered nearby with food and drinks. They looked relaxed, talking and smiling. She told herself that if she was going to ask anyone, it should be people who were already in a good mood. Her steps were slow as she approached. She kept her voice soft, almost unsure of itself, even though her heart was beating fast. She asked politely if she could play the piano for a piece of food. Just one piece, she said. She did not ask for money. She did not beg. She only offered music in return. For a moment there was silence. Then someone laughed. It was not loud, but it was enough. Another person smiled in a way that was not kind. Someone else repeated her words as if they were a joke. A few people nearby turned to look. The attention made her face warm. She stood there, hands loosely at her sides, waiting. She did not argue or explain. She had learned that explaining rarely helped. The laughter grew, not cruel but careless. The kind that comes from not thinking too deeply about another person. One voice said something like, "Go on then," not because they believed in her, but because they were curious. Another said it would be funny to see what happened. Someone else shrugged and said there was no harm in letting her try. She nodded once. She did not smile. She simply walked toward the piano. The closer she got, the quieter the space became. Some people leaned forward, others crossed their arms. A few already looked bored. To them, this was just a moment to pass time. To her, it was much more than that. She stopped in front of the piano and placed her hands near the keys without touching them. For a second, she closed her eyes. She was not praying, and she was not trying to impress anyone. She was remembering. She was finding the part of herself that had been buried under long days and longer nights. Her fingers hovered, slightly shaking. Not from fear, but from how long it had been. She had not touched a piano in years. Life had pulled her in other directions, none of them gentle. Still, muscle memory is a quiet thing. It waits. Someone coughed. Someone else checked their phone. The world did not pause for her. But inside something did. She pressed the first key. The sound was soft. Almost too soft. A few people exchanged looks. It did not sound wrong, but it did not sound impressive either. She continued. Slowly. Carefully. The notes followed one another in a simple pattern. Like a path she knew by heart. She was not performing yet. She was warming up, both the piano and herself. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. Her breathing evened out. The hunger, the noise, the laughter from moments before began to fade. A few people lost interest and turned away. Others stayed, more out of politeness than belief. No one expected much. That was clear. Her hands began to move more freely. The notes grew clearer, more confident. There was feeling in them, not forced, not dramatic, but honest. The piano responded, its sound filling the space in a way it had not earlier. Someone stopped mid-sentence. Another person tilted their head. The change was small, but it was there. She did not look up. She did not need to. Her world had narrowed to black and white keys, to rhythm and breath. Every note carried something she could not put into words. Years of holding on. Years of letting go. The city noise blended with the music at first, then slowly fell behind it. The piano became the loudest thing in the space, not because it was played hard, but because it was played with purpose. A child sat down on the floor nearby, watching. A woman holding a drink lowered it without realizing. The group that had laughed earlier grew quiet, their smiles fading into something else. Still, she kept playing as if no one was there. She did not know how long she would be allowed to continue. She did not know if someone would stop her or tell her to leave. She did not think about the food anymore. All of that could wait. This moment could not. The melody began to take shape, rising and falling gently. It was not a famous song, but it felt familiar, like something remembered rather than learned. It carried warmth, then sadness, then a small hint of hope. People nearby began to notice that something unexpected was happening. This was not a joke. This was not a trick. This was skill. Yet no one clapped. Not yet. It was too early. The room was still changing, still adjusting to a new truth. She played on, unaware that this simple request for food had already turned into something much bigger. Unaware that the laughter from earlier now felt distant and misplaced. For the first time that day, she felt seen, even if no one had said a word. And as the music continued, the space around her held its breath, waiting for what would come next. The music continued, steady and calm, as if it had always belonged in that space. At first, people did not know how to react. They had expected a quick mistake or an awkward moment. Instead, the sound held together, clear and sure. It was not loud, but it carried weight. The kind that makes people pause without knowing why. A few more heads turned. Someone nudged a friend and pointed toward the piano. Conversations slowed. The laughter from earlier felt far away now, almost embarrassing in hindsight. Those who had scoffed did not say anything. They simply listened, trying to understand what they were hearing. She sat straight, her hands moving with purpose. Each note landed where it should, not rushed, not unsure. Her fingers knew the path, even if her life had taken her far from this moment. The piano responded like an old friend, familiar and forgiving. A man nearby leaned against a table and crossed his arms, his expression changing from boredom to interest. A woman stepped closer, careful not to interrupt. Someone else quietly pulled out a phone, not to mock, but to record. Still, no one spoke. She did not notice any of this. Her eyes stayed on the keys. She followed the music wherever it led. There was a softness in the way she played, but also strength. It felt like a story unfolding, one note at a time. The melody shifted slightly, becoming more complex. The rhythm deepened. The sound grew fuller, filling the open space in a way that made the city noise seem distant. Even the traffic nearby felt muted, as if it had agreed to give her room. A child whispered something to an adult, but the adult gently shook their head, asking for quiet. That small gesture said more than words. Respect had entered the space. Her shoulders relaxed more as she played. The shaking in her hands disappeared. She was no longer testing herself. She was trusting herself. Years of holding back gave way to something honest and free. People began to feel something they did not expect. It was not just surprise. It was emotion, the kind that creeps up quietly and stays. Some felt warmth. Others felt a tightness in their chest they could not explain. Someone who had laughed earlier shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware of their reaction from before. They watched her now with a different look, one that carried regret. The music rose and fell, like breathing. At moments it was gentle, almost fragile. At others it grew confident, bold without being loud. It did not ask for attention. It earned it. More people gathered. Not a crowd yet, but enough to change the feeling of the place. Chairs were turned. Food trays were forgotten. Time seemed to slow. She moved into a passage that required focus. Her fingers crossed and lifted with ease, the way they once had long ago. She remembered practicing late into the night, chasing perfection, believing music could protect her from the world. Life had proved otherwise, but music had never truly left her. A small mistake slipped through, barely noticeable. She corrected it without stopping. No one cared. It only made the moment more real. Someone near the piano whispered, "She's good." The words were soft but honest. They spread quietly, one person to another, without need for exaggeration. She felt the shift, even without looking up. The air felt different, warmer, safer. It allowed her to take another risk, to push the melody further. She did, and the result was beautiful. A man who had been eating set his food down untouched. A woman clasped her hands together, her eyes fixed on the player. No one checked their phone now. The piano sang. There was no better way to describe it. It sang of loss and persistence, of nights spent wondering what might have been, of mornings that still asked for hope. She was no longer playing for food. She was playing because she needed to, because the music had waited patiently for her to return. The sound echoed softly against the surrounding walls. Even people passing by slowed their steps, drawn in by something they could not name. A few stopped entirely, joining the quiet circle that had formed. Her face remained calm, but inside, emotions moved freely. Memories surfaced and passed without pulling her under. She stayed present, anchored by the keys beneath her fingers. The piece began to approach its center, where everything comes together. The melody repeated itself, stronger now, layered with feeling. It felt like a turning point, though no one knew yet what it would lead to. Someone cleared their throat, then stopped, realizing how loud the sound was in the silence. Another person gently shushed them, smiling. Those who had doubted her now watched with full attention. Not curiosity anymore, but admiration. The idea that she had asked for food earlier felt almost unreal. She shifted slightly on the bench, adjusting her balance, preparing for what came next. The music demanded more from her now, and she was ready to give it. A breeze passed through the open space, lifting a few loose strands of her hair. She did not notice. The world beyond the piano barely existed. The notes quickened, then softened again. It was controlled, intentional. Nothing was wasted. Every sound had a place. A woman near the front felt tears rise and quickly brushed them away, embarrassed by her own reaction. She did not know why the music affected her so deeply. She only knew that it did. The city seemed to listen. As the melody moved toward its final section, the feeling in the air grew heavier, fuller. People sensed that something important was unfolding, even if they could not explain it. She remained unaware of how many hearts she was touching. She did not see the respect in their faces or the silence they offered her so freely. All she knew was that for the first time in a long while, she felt whole. And as her fingers pressed the keys with renewed strength, it became clear that this moment was no longer just about a simple request or a piece of food. It was becoming something unforgettable, something that would not end when the music stopped. The music carried on, but something had clearly shifted. What began as curiosity had now turned into full attention. People no longer stood casually. They leaned in, as if the sound might slip away if they did not hold on to it. The space felt smaller, quieter, shaped by the notes moving through it. She felt the change without looking up. There was a stillness around her that had not been there before. It gave her confidence, not the loud kind, but a steady one. Her hands moved with more certainty now, trusting both the piano and herself. The melody slowed, then deepened. Each note seemed to land heavier than the last, not because of force but because of feeling. It was the kind of sound that made people think of moments they had not revisited in years. Old memories, missed chances, quiet hopes. A man standing near the back stepped forward without realizing it. A woman placed her hand over her mouth, eyes fixed on the keys. Someone else gently pulled a chair closer, careful not to make noise. No one wanted to break the spell. She played as if the piano were speaking for her. Words had failed her many times in life, but music never had. It did not judge or interrupt. It listened and responded. Her thoughts drifted briefly, not away from the moment, but deeper into it. She remembered the first time she had touched a piano, how strange and exciting it felt. She remembered believing that music could open doors. Life had closed many of those doors since then, but the belief had never fully died. The sound grew richer. She moved into a section that required more strength, more reach. Her arms lifted slightly, her posture firm. This was not background music anymore. This was a statement. Those who had laughed earlier now stood frozen, their faces serious. One of them looked down at the ground, then back up again, as if trying to correct a mistake that could not be undone. The city noise returned briefly when a siren passed in the distance, but it faded quickly, swallowed by the music. Even the wind seemed to slow. She felt something rise in her chest, a mix of emotion she had kept buried for a long time. She let it flow into her hands. The piano answered, its sound warm and full. A few people exchanged looks, silently acknowledging that this was no ordinary moment. This was someone reclaiming a part of herself. The melody climbed higher, then paused, just for a heartbeat. The silence that followed was thick and heavy. No one moved. No one breathed too loudly. Then she continued, softer than before. The contrast pulled people in even closer. It felt intimate now, like a secret being shared with strangers. A woman near the front felt tears slip down her face and did not wipe them away this time. She did not know the reason for her reaction, only that it felt right to let it happen. She adjusted her hands, shifting into a passage that required speed and control. Her fingers moved quickly, but never rushed. Every note was clear. Every pause had meaning. Someone whispered that they had never heard anything like this here. Another nodded, afraid to speak louder. She remained unaware of the full effect she was having. She was not playing for praise or approval. She was playing to survive something inside herself. The music told a story of falling and standing back up, of being overlooked, of finding strength where no one thought it existed. More people gathered at the edges of the space, drawn by the quiet crowd and the powerful sound. They slowed their steps, then stopped completely. No one asked questions. The answer was already there. Her breathing stayed steady as the piece moved forward. She had reached a place where effort and instinct met, where thinking stopped and feeling took over. The piano bench felt solid beneath her, grounding her in the present. For once, she was not worried about what would happen next. This moment was enough. A man near the front closed his eyes, listening. Another person clasped their hands tightly, as if holding on to something fragile. The melody returned to a familiar theme, stronger than before. It felt like coming home after a long absence. She felt warmth spread through her chest, pushing back the cold memories of recent days. Hunger, exhaustion, uncertainty all faded into the background. The sound filled every corner of the space now. It was impossible to ignore. Someone near the piano quietly set a small plate of food on a nearby table, unsure if it would distract her. They stepped back, leaving it there without a word. She did not see it. Her hands moved with confidence she had not felt in years. The music lifted, then softened again, guiding listeners through waves of emotion. A few people smiled without realizing it. Others stood with serious expressions, deeply moved. The piece began to approach its end, though no one wanted it to. There was a sense of something important nearing completion. She leaned slightly forward, her focus sharp. The final section demanded everything she had left, and she was ready. The notes rang out clear and strong, then slowly eased into a gentle close. The sound lingered, hanging in the air long after her fingers lifted from the keys. Silence followed. Not the awkward kind, the respectful kind. The kind that says no one wants to be the first to speak. She stayed still, hands resting lightly on her lap, eyes lowered. She did not look at the crowd. She was catching her breath, steadying herself. In that quiet moment, something changed forever. The way people saw her. the way she saw herself. No applause came yet. It was not time. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would happen next. The silence stayed longer than anyone expected. It was thick and steady, not awkward, not unsure. Felt earned. People stood still, as if moving too soon might break something fragile that had just been created. She remained seated at the piano, her hands resting quietly, her eyes still lowered. Her chest rose and fell slowly as she caught her breath. She was not waiting for praise. She was simply letting the moment settle. Then someone near the front brought their hands together. The sound was soft at first, almost hesitant. Another followed. Then another. Within seconds, the space filled with applause, not loud or wild, but deep and sincere. The kind that comes from respect rather than excitement. She looked up for the first time. What she saw surprised her. Faces that once carried doubt now showed admiration. Some people smiled warmly. Others looked thoughtful, almost changed. A few had eyes still shining with emotion. No one laughed now. No one scoffed. She stood slowly, unsure what to do next. Her legs felt slightly weak, not from fear, but from the release of everything she had held inside. The applause continued, steady and strong. Someone spoke up, thanking her. Another said the music was beautiful. The words reached her, but they felt distant, like echoes. She nodded politely, her expression calm but overwhelmed. A small plate of food sat on a nearby table. She noticed it then. It looked simple, but to her it meant more than a meal. It meant someone had listened. Someone had believed. She stepped away from the piano and hesitated, unsure if she should take the food. She had asked for it, but now it felt different. She did not want pity. She did not want to take more than she had earned. A person nearby gently pushed the plate closer to her, offering a quiet smile. No words were needed. She accepted it with a soft thank you. Her voice was barely louder than the piano had been at the start. As she took a small bite, people began talking again, but the tone had changed. It was calmer, kinder. Strangers spoke to one another as if they had shared something important. Someone asked where she learned to play. She answered simply, without details. Music had been part of her life for a long time, she said. Nothing more. Another asked why she stopped. She paused before answering, then said that life sometimes takes people away from the things they love. Her words were honest and careful. No one pushed further. A man near the piano shook his head slowly, still amazed. He admitted he had laughed earlier and said he was sorry. His voice carried no excuse, only regret. She met his eyes and nodded. She did not hold anger. She had learned long ago that anger only weighs down the person who carries it. The crowd slowly began to thin, but not completely. Some stayed, asking quiet questions. Others simply wanted to be near her for a little longer, as if the moment might still offer something. She finished the food slowly, savoring each bite. Hunger faded, replaced by a warmth that had little to do with eating. Someone asked if she would play again. The question caught her off guard. She had not planned on it. She had already given more than she expected of herself. She looked at the piano, then back at the faces around her. There was no pressure in them now, only hope. She said maybe, not today but someday. The answer seemed to satisfy them. A person who worked in the area approached and thanked her for the music. They said it had changed the mood of the whole place. She smiled faintly at that. As people drifted away, she felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, pride, fear. The moment had been powerful, but what came next felt uncertain. She gathered her things, few as they were, and prepared to leave. The piano stood quietly behind her, its keys still warm. Before she could take more than a few steps, someone stopped her. They spoke carefully, asking if she had ever considered playing more often. Maybe teaching, maybe performing. She listened, unsure how to respond. Those words belonged to a world she had once known but no longer felt part of. She answered honestly. She said she did not know where she would sleep that night. She did not know what tomorrow would bring. Making plans felt difficult. The person nodded, understanding more than they said. They offered help, not as charity, but as support. A conversation, they said. Nothing more. No promises. She agreed to talk. They moved to the side, away from the piano. The rest of the space returned to its usual rhythm, but something lingered. People who passed through felt it, even if they did not know why. As they spoke, she realized how long it had been since someone had asked her about her future instead of her past. She did not give many answers. She was cautious. Life had taught her to be. Still, she felt a small opening inside herself. A door not fully closed. When the conversation ended, she was given a piece of paper with a number written on it. No pressure. Just an option. She folded it carefully and placed it in her pocket. The sun had begun to lower, casting long shadows across the space. The day was moving on, but the memory of what had happened felt fresh and alive. She took one last look at the piano before leaving. It had given her more than music that day. It had given her back a piece of herself. As she walked away, people no longer avoided her gaze. Some nodded. Others smiled. A few whispered to one another, still shaken by what they had witnessed. She did not walk differently. She did not suddenly feel certain about the future. But she felt lighter. For the first time in a long while, she carried something other than survival with her. She carried possibility. And though the road ahead remained unclear, she knew one thing for certain. She was no longer invisible. The night air felt cooler as she walked away from the place where the piano stood. The sounds of the city returned to normal, but inside her, something remained different. Her steps were slow, not from tiredness alone, but from thought. The moment kept replaying in her mind, not as noise or praise, but as feeling. She reached a quiet corner and sat down, holding her small bag close. The paper in her pocket felt heavier than it should have. A simple number written in plain ink, yet it carried a question she had not allowed herself to ask in a long time. What if life could move in another direction? She had learned to live one day at a time. Planning too far ahead often led to disappointment. Still, that night, the future refused to stay silent. She ate the rest of the food slowly, making it last. As she did, she noticed how calm she felt. Hunger no longer pressed at her thoughts. Instead, memories came gently, without pain. She remembered the first room where she had practiced music as a child. It had been small but full of sound. She remembered believing that music would always be there to guide her. Over time, life had demanded other things. Work that paid little. Long hours. Places that were not safe. Music became something she carried quietly, never shared. That night, she slept lightly, waking often. Each time she did, she heard the piano again, clear and steady. Felt less like a dream and more like a reminder. When morning came, she washed her face and sat in the early light. The city looked different in the quiet hours. Softer, less demanding. She took out the paper again and stared at it. Her hand hovered, uncertain. Reaching out meant risking disappointment. Staying silent meant returning to the same path. After a long pause, she made the call. The voice on the other end sounded surprised, then pleased. They spoke kindly, asking how she was. Not what she needed, not what she lacked, just how she was. They suggested meeting later that day, somewhere public. No pressure. She agreed. The hours before the meeting passed slowly. Doubt crept in. She wondered if she had imagined the kindness in that space, if it had only existed because of the music. Still, she showed up. They talked for a long time. She shared only what felt safe. Her love for music. The way life had pulled her away from it. The way she had kept playing quietly, whenever she could find a moment. They listened without interrupting. They explained that talent like hers should not stay hidden. Not for fame, not for money, but for meaning. They spoke of small steps, lessons, a place to practice. Nothing sudden, nothing overwhelming. She felt a mix of hope and fear. Trust had not always been kind to her, but this felt different. There were no promises that sounded too good to be true. They asked her if she wanted to try. She said yes. Over the next few days, small changes began. She was given access to a piano in a quiet room. The first time she sat down to play alone, her hands trembled again, but this time from joy. She played slowly, listening to the sound fill the room. There was no audience, no judgment, just her and the music. Word spread quietly, not online, not loudly, just person to person. Someone had heard her play. Someone had been moved. She began playing more often, sometimes for a few people, sometimes alone. Each time the music felt stronger, clearer. She was offered simple work connected to music, helping clean the space, organizing sheets, small things that brought stability. Her life did not change overnight. She still faced challenges. She still worried about where she would be in a week, a month. But something important had shifted. People looked at her differently now. More importantly, she looked at herself differently. One evening, she returned to the same public place where everything had begun. The piano stood there again, waiting. She hesitated, then sat down. This time no one laughed. People gathered naturally. Some recognized her. Others simply listened. She played with confidence, not to prove anything, but to share. The music carried across the space, familiar yet new. It held gratitude now, layered with hope. When she finished, the applause was warm and easy. It felt like welcome rather than surprise. Someone in the crowd whispered that they would never forget the first time they heard her play. She smiled softly. Later that night, as she walked away, she realized how far she had come in such a short time. Not in distance, but in belief. She knew challenges still waited ahead. Life would not suddenly become simple, but she also knew she would face it with something she had lost for years. Purpose. The music had not saved her. She had saved herself by returning to it. And with every step forward, the sound of that piano followed her, steady and sure, reminding her that even the smallest chance can change everything. Time moved forward quietly after that. There was no sudden headline, no dramatic announcement. Life continued in small steps the way real change often does. She woke each morning with the same uncertainty she had always known, but now it was mixed with something new. Expectation. The room where she practiced became a place of comfort. The piano waited for her there, steady and patient. She learned its moods, the way certain keys responded more softly than others. Each session brought her closer to herself. She was not chasing perfection. She was rebuilding trust. Some days were hard. Old worries returned without warning. She wondered how long the support would last, whether people would lose interest once the moment faded. Those thoughts came quietly, but she did not let them stop her. She had learned that fear did not mean failure. It only meant she cared. She continued to play in public spaces when invited. Sometimes there were many listeners. Sometimes only a few. It did not matter. She played the same way each time, with honesty. People responded not just to her skill, but to the feeling she brought with her. She began to speak a little more about her journey. Not the painful details, just enough to remind people that talent does not disappear when life becomes difficult. It only waits. One afternoon, a young listener approached her after a performance and said the music had helped them feel less alone. The words stayed with her long after the sound had faded. She realized then that her story was no longer only hers. The support around her grew slowly. Opportunities came, modest but meaningful. A chance to teach a few beginners. A small performance at a local event. Each step felt earned. She remained careful not to rush. She had learned that rushing often leads back to the same place. The public space where everything began still existed, unchanged. The piano still stood there, polished and waiting. She returned occasionally, not out of need, but out of gratitude. People remembered her now. They greeted her with warmth. One evening, she sat at that same piano as the sun dipped low. The crowd was calm, relaxed. Some recognized her. Others did not. It did not matter. She began to play. The music flowed easily, without tension. Carried strength but also peace. The kind that comes from knowing you survived something and found meaning on the other side. As she played, she noticed something simple and powerful. No one laughed. No one doubted. They listened. When she finished, The applause was gentle. She smiled and stood, bowing her head slightly, felt complete. Later, as she walked away, she thought about the question she had asked that first day. Can I play for a piece of food? The answer had turned out to be much larger than food. She had played for dignity, for recognition, for the chance to be seen. Life was still uncertain. She still faced challenges. But she was no longer invisible to herself. She carried her music with her wherever she went. Not as a performance, but as a reminder of who she was. People continued to cross her path. Some stayed. Some moved on. She learned not to measure her worth by how long others remained. What mattered was that she had reclaimed her voice. In quiet moments, she reflected on how easily people judge what they do not understand. How quickly laughter can turn into silence. And how much power lives in a single moment of courage. She never forgot the feeling of that first key beneath her finger. The risk it took to press it. That risk had changed everything. The city remained loud and busy. People hurried past one another, caught in their own lives. But sometimes when she played, they slowed down. They listened. They remembered. And in those moments, the world felt just a little kinder. She did not know where the road would lead next. But she knew she would walk it with her head higher than before. Because once someone is truly heard, they never disappear again. Her story did not end with applause. It continued with purpose. And that was enough.